Grom. Right now, he is a really bad brawler. There is not that many use cases for him, and his attack is very easy to dodge if you know what you're doing. And this is not like, for example, tanks, where if they face a tank counter, they get countered. With Grom, anyone who knows how to dodge his attack can easily defeat a Grom. So this actually puts Grom in a position where you winning a match with him doesn't rely on your skill, but on the lack of skill of your enemy. And this makes Grom extremely unfair and unfun as well. So, how did Grom ended up in this position? Today, we'll be taking a look at Grom's history, his release, his best metas, and his worst metas. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and let's start off with Grom's release.
It is time for party!
Grom was released in the 22nd of December 2021 through a challenge, the good old days I guess, and back then he had quite a lot of different stats. He used to have an equivalent of 6000 HP at max level. He dealt way much less damage, dealing only 2000 damage instead of the nowadays 2280, but the biggest change was that both his basic attack and his super had different travel speed based on the distance. This meant that if you throw your attack or super right next to you, it deployed instantly, which made his attack very easy to land at close range, which is not the case nowadays. His super split range was 8.33 tiles instead of the nowadays 5.67. The super damage was the equivalent of 3400 instead of the nowadays 3200. And finally, the first gadget HP was 2000 and the decay was only 50 HP per second instead of the nowadays 1500 HP with 75 HP decay. So, with all these differences, all I'm going to say is that Grom was insanely broken. He was the equivalent of a Larry and Lori, not at its release, but very similar to it, because the simple fact that you could land your shots up close made Grom the perfect thrower at mid ranges, which was just simply really good. On top of that, his first gadget had so much HP and also just lasted way much longer. And it is not just having more HP. Back then, because each level only gave an additional 5% stat, the gadget HP was also way much superior because all of the brawlers had less HP back then. So the gadget was really powerful. And with all of this being said, because Grom was the best brawler in the game pretty much, you would expect him to be nerfed, but actually, much for the opposite. In the 4th of January 2022, his recharge rate was increased by 1%. And this might sound ridiculous, but one stat I actually didn't mention was the super recharge rate, which it is 22% right now, and back then was 19%. And why such a specific number? Well, this actually meant that even if you hit one enemy with the super, you would still need 5 hits to get the super. So only by hitting 2 enemies with the super, your super would technically cost less 1 basic attack, which that weird interaction was now fixed. So every hit that you would get with your massive super would reduce the next super cost by 1 hit, which just made cycling supers with Grom even better. Yet, even with this really good buff, Grom's luck was not over yet, because just 1 week later, his second star power got released, which drastically increased the damage of his projectile, like how it does nowadays. But this star power also had one secret mechanic that wasn't very spoken at its time, which was that not only this star power increased the damage of your basic, as it also increased the charge rate of your basic attack, allowing you in some scenarios to get your super in just 4 hits instead of the usual 5. So Grom was just getting better and better.
Pancake!
So eventually, after in and around 1 month from his release, Grom would receive his first pair of nerfs, and they were quite substantial. His damage at maximum level would be reduced from the equivalent of nowadays 2000 to 1800, and his super cost would get increased from 5 hits to 6 hits. On top of that, the first gadget was nerfed to what it is nowadays. And fun bonus fact, actually at this time there was a little bit of a bug where Grom's super actually costed 7 hits for some random reason. There has been potentially some mistake when doing the calculation on the charge rate because his super actually costed 7 hits. But since everyone with 2 brain cells used the second star power, and because the second star power back then gave you bonus charge rate, in 99% of the cases you would actually not notice this weird interaction. So it wasn't actually as impactful as it sounds. On top of that, in the 18th of February, that bug was eventually patched. So Supercell did all of these nerfs and Grom was still considered an S tier brawler. Maybe not the best in the game anymore, but still absolutely busted. So, in the 1st of March 2022, Grom would receive a nerf that would change his playstyle forever. Both his main attack and super would now have a constant travel time. So this meant that at long ranges it was better, but at close ranges it was just insanely horrible. His super split range was also reduced from 8.33 tiles to 5.67 tiles. At the same time, his second gadget would also get released, which was at least some good news because the second gadget it is by far the better one out of the two. On top of these nerfs, just 1 day later, in the 2nd of March, Grom would also have a little bug fix which was technically a nerf, where his first gadget would no longer reveal invisible enemies that were in bushes. So if a Leon was using his super and for some reason was in a bush, Grom's first gadget could actually still reveal it. So it was a small nerf to the gadget still. At first, some people still thought that Grom would still be a decent brawler, but it didn't took very long for everyone to realize just how simply awful it was to play with Grom. It was really bad because literally anyone could just approach Grom and literally kill him. So it was really bad. And like if things weren't horrible enough already, his second star power in the 27th of April 2022 also lost its bonus charge rate mechanic. So this means that Grom would always need 6 hits to get his super, which was another small disadvantage. And at this point, everyone knew that Grom was just unusable. A very hard to land attack and a super that, even though it was pretty powerful, you could very well never get it. So Grom had clearly fell a lot since his prime, but luckily for Grom, his luck was about to change in a bit.
Who is laughing at Grom now?
In the 29th of June 2022, Grom would receive a small rework, which for most of the time it was just a buff. His basic attack damage was drastically increased from an equivalent to nowadays 1800 damage to 2200 damage. But as a small compensation, his super damage would be reduced from 3400 to only 3200. So, thanks to this buff, Grom was actually a little bit better. Not only because he dealt more damage, but this also technically applied some more damage to his second star power, which was really great, and to his second gadget as well, making his basic attack a lot more menacing, making Grom this brawler that was sort of a high risk, high reward. If you landed your shots, good, you would be very valuable. But if you miss your shots, it would be pretty bad for you. And unfortunately, over time, people just got used to Grom and just started to learn how to truly dodge every single one of his hits. So again, it still didn't took very long for Grom to fall off the meta again. So, in the 12th of December 2022, Grom would receive a really big buff. His damage would be increased from 2200 to 2320, the highest it has ever been up to this day, and his projectile speed of the basic attack would be increased by a whopping 10%. And so far, one of the things that I've said the most since his constant travel time nerf is that his shot was too hard to land. And well, now his shot was impossible to miss. It was broken. Grom was really strong. Some even argue that he could be the best brawler in the game. His very high damage mixed with an amazing second gadget, the second sword which just dealt more damage, a super that could knock enemies back and deal insane damage, the fact his basic attack could pierce through enemies. Grom had a lot going on for him. And so much, in fact, that just 1 month later, in the 12th of January 2023, his projectile speed would be slightly reduced by 4.5%, essentially becoming a middle term of what he does before the original buff and after the buff. But even with this nerf, his shots were just still very strong. His basic attack was still relatively easy to hit, and the second gadget was still very strong, and the second star power just added a lot of damage. Because of all of this, in the 28th of February 2023, Grom's damage would be reduced from 2320 to 2160, which at the time felt really fair because his shots were just so consistent at long range, so reducing the damage felt like the obvious approach, especially because he had a lot of damage going on thanks to his second star power and second gadget. And everything actually became balanced again until unbreakable walls got added into the game. And even though unbreakable walls are not that big of a deal nowadays, back then each map had in and around double the amount of unbreakable walls. So as you can guess, for a thrower, having a wall that cannot be broken would be something very strong for them to have. And thanks to this extra layer of protection, because back then wall breakers were very popular, so having unbreakable walls again just made Grom very strong again, almost S tier. So because of this, Supercell would apply one final nerf to him. So, in the 15th of May 2023, his HP got reduced from 6000 to 5600. So now Grom was even more squishy than before. And this was a great nerf. Not only it made snipers better against him because now he had less HP, but also assassins would deal way much better with him, which there were a couple assassins back at the time. And for a couple of months he actually stayed in the B tier. He was very good in knockout and bounty due to his long range advantage and high damage thanks to his second star power and second gadget, and you could still use him in hot zone, although not as prevalent as knockout or bounty. Unfortunately for Grom, there was one thing that would come into the game that would change everything drastically. And I am talking about hypercharges. Hypercharges were the definition of power creep in the game. Not only in speed, in HP, in aggressive playstyle, but also in speed. And if there was one thing that Grom hated, were movement speed. because the faster the Brawler, the harder it would be to land his projectiles. And because his projectiles are just so fundamentally necessary for him to do anything at all, and because they were already relatively hard to land, this was a massive bad news for Grom. And after a couple of months after the release of Hypercharges, Grom fell to the bottom of the meta. He simply could not deal with any of the new aggressive brawlers and the Hypercharges. So Grom, even though was very good and very balanced for a long time, this insane shift in the meta completely destroyed him.
The bear is sleeping.
Eventually, Supercell would actually buff Grom a little bit to try to fix his uselessness in the game. In the 27th of August 2024, his damage would be significantly increased from 2160 to 2280. Still not as much as his previous broken state, but very close to it. But on top of that, his super cost was reduced from 6 hits to 5 hits, which was great. Now, getting your super was a way much easier task, which Grom's super, even after so many nerfs, it is still a great super. So even though this was good and it did help him, it didn't fix any of Grom's core issues. And even though Grom was still a horrible brawler, he would still receive no changes for half a year. So, in the 25th of February 2025, gadgets now work on cooldowns instead of just having a limit. And this would actually be good for Grom overall because his second gadget ended up having a relatively small cooldown, which was somewhat of a decent help for Grom, so now he could spam a little bit more his second gadget. On top of that, during this time, his attack had a little bit of a bug fix where now you could actually attack water. Back then, for whatever reason, Grom could not throw his projectile to water, which it was a very weird thing, and even weirder to think how long it stayed in the game. Like, it took 4 years to fix this, which, looking back, that's just kinda wild. And eventually, after suffering so long to other people's hypercharge, Grom would get a hypercharge of his own. In the 24th of March 2025, Grom would receive his very own hypercharge, which, truth being said, even though the effect was good and everything about the hypercharge felt pretty valuable, the hypercharge just showed us even more what Grom's fatal flaw it is. Landing shots, it's very hard. It didn't really matter having a hypercharge if against good players you would never land a shot, therefore never getting a super, therefore never getting a hypercharge. So unfortunately, even with his brand new hypercharge, Grom was still unusable in ranked and in any high level of competition in Brawl Stars. The final change that Grom received, if you can even call it that, was in the 23rd of April 2025 to his hypercharge, receiving a bonus damage increase by 1%. And this was the third time that Supercell changed a stat in Grom by 1%. Never understood why Grom had so many 1%-ish issues, but it was a buff, and his hypercharge super at least dealt a tiny bit more damage, which it is always nice to have. And this leads us to today. So, Grom right now, it is pretty much useless. A brawler whose shot is just way too hard to hit and way too punishing if it lands. And honestly, there are just so many changes that I would like to see to Grom. Potentially a HP buff and a reload speed buff. I feel like at least both of these need to happen because 2 seconds of waiting for a shot at it is just so hard to land. It just feels very, very punishing if you do not connect the attack, which just makes playing Grom just impossible. And the HP is just necessary because nowadays we have so many assassins and tanks that he just gets shredded by anything and everything. And in an ideal world, I would even say that he should get a projectile speed buff, because people that already have an issue dodging his main attack, Grom having a projectile speed buff wouldn't change that. But against people that do know how to dodge it, it would now be a little bit trickier. But that could make Grom toxic again, so to be honest, I'm not even sure that would be a good idea. With all of this being said, hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you all on the next video.